Imagine a time when Japan was under the rule of a powerful and ambitious leader named Toyotomi Hideyoshi. This was in the late 16th century, and Hideyoshi had grand dreams, dreams of an empire that stretched far beyond Japan's shores. His eyes were set on China, but to get there, he first had to conquer Korea. It all began in 1592. Hideyoshi's plan was daring and audacious. He aimed to march through Korea and then on to China. His initial success was impressive. Japanese forces swiftly captured key cities like Pyongyang and Seoul, striking fear into their enemies. It seemed as if nothing could stop Hideyoshi's ambitions. However, the tide soon turned. The Korean Navy, under the brilliant leadership of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, proved to be a formidable foe. Alongside the Koreans, a massive land army from Ming China joined the fight, and local Korean rebels rose up against the invaders. By 1593, the first invasion had ground to a halt. Peace talks dragged on without success, and in 1597, Hideyoshi tried again. This second invasion was far less successful. The Japanese forces struggled, and when Hideyoshi died in 1598, the invasion fell apart and the Japanese troops retreated. This conflict, known as the Imjin Wars, was one of the largest military operations in East Asia before the 20th century. It had devastating effects on all sides and left a lasting bitterness between Japan and Korea. Toyotomi Hideyoshi himself was a fascinating figure. He had risen to power after the death of his predecessor, Oda Nobunaga, in 1582. Both leaders had worked to unify Japan, and Hideyoshi's newfound power made him hungry for more. He dreamed of an empire and believed that conquering China was within his reach, but first, Korea had to fall. Some historians think Hideyoshi's ambitions were a sign of a troubled mind. He was known to be paranoid, even suspecting his own nephew and chosen heir of plotting against him. Yet, despite these quirks, he was a strategic genius. He didn't lead his armies into battle personally in Korea, perhaps knowing his strengths lay in planning and not on the battlefield. Some also suggest that Hideyoshi's decision to invade Korea was a clever move to keep his powerful generals occupied and prevent them from causing trouble back home. Regardless of his true motives, the meticulous planning and bold strategy of the invasion bore the hallmark of Hideyoshi's brilliance. It was an incredibly ambitious plan, and if anyone could have pulled it off, it was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. And in April 1592, Toyotomi Hideyoshi put his ambitious plan into action by assembling a massive fighting force, 158,000 warriors and a navy with 9,200 mariners. Additionally, he kept another 100,000 armed men in reserve in northern Kyushu. The invading army was based at Nagoya in Hizen and led by three powerful daimyo, or feudal lords, Kato Kiyomasa, Konishi Yukinaga, and Kuroda Nagamasa. With most of the ships manned by former pirates, the naval fleet set sail in May. They arrived near the port of Pusan, at the southeastern tip of Korea. The Japanese got off to a strong start, capturing the fort at Pusan despite fierce resistance. Soon after, they defeated a Korean army led by General Sen IP at the Battle of Cheongju. Equipped with advanced firearms and benefiting from meticulous planning and professionalism, the Japanese swiftly captured Seoul on June 12. King Shonjo of Korea fled north in a desperate attempt to escape the invading forces. The Japanese army then divided into three groups. Konishi Yukinaga led his forces to capture Pyongyang on July 23, while Kato Kiyomasa marched toward the northern frontier with Manchuria and the Yalu River. Meanwhile, Kuroda Nagamasa advanced to the northeast. Other units were dispatched to secure the central and southern regions of the peninsula. Phase 1 of the invasion had been a resounding success. However, the Japanese soon encountered a formidable obstacle: the Korean Navy, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Yi Sun-sin. Despite having only a small number of turtle ships, Kobuksen, possibly the world's first ironclad battleships, with covered decks and equipped with cannons, Yi Sun-sin managed to cut off Japanese resupply efforts. Though he couldn't completely block supplies to Pusan, he achieved several key naval victories at Hingju, Chinju, and Hansan Island, preventing the Japanese from entering the Yellow Sea and supporting their northern armies. Logistics became a nightmare for the Japanese, and their supplies dwindled. Adding to their troubles, the harsh Japanese occupation sparked numerous peasant uprisings and a widespread resistance campaign, further disrupting the supply lines and communications. The most significant turning point came with the intervention of Ming China. Emperor Wanli, realizing that the Japanese invasion was likely a prelude to an attack on China itself, and fulfilling his duty under the East Asian tributary system, sent a small army led by General Li Rusong to aid Korea in July 1592. Although this initial force was easily repelled, Wanli was undeterred. He dispatched a second, much larger army of about 50,000 men. Arriving in Korea a few months later, this force defeated Konishi Yukinaga's army at Pyongyang in early 1553, forcing the Japanese to retreat to Seoul. From Seoul, Konishi negotiated an end to hostilities, but the Japanese continued to occupy southern Korea for the next 4 years. During this armistice, a series of complex negotiations unfolded between Japan, China, and Korea. In June 1593, the Chinese sent an envoy to negotiate directly with Hideyoshi in Japan. Boldly, or perhaps madly, Hideyoshi demanded impossible terms: the restoration of the old system of tribute trade, a marriage alliance between himself and a daughter of Emperor Wanli, and control of 4 southern Korean provinces. Realizing such demands would lead nowhere, Konishi took matters into his own hands. He forged a letter from Hideyoshi, suggesting the warlord might accept being a theoretical vassal of the Chinese emperor. The Chinese, willing to bestow the title King of Japan on Hideyoshi, sent ambassadors to Osaka in December 1596. When Hideyoshi discovered these secret negotiations, he was furious. He dismissed the Chinese envoys and began preparations for a second invasion of Korea. And in August 1597, Hideyoshi sent the reserve army of 100,000 men to Korea, aiming to permanently annex the 4 southern provinces. This time, the objective was more limited than the first invasion, but several factors worked against the Japanese from the start. First, the Koreans were prepared and knew what to expect. Second, a Chinese army was already stationed in Korea. Third, the formidable Korean Navy, still commanded by Admiral Yi Sun-sin, who had returned after a brief imprisonment, remained in control of the coastal waters. Despite these challenges, the invasion initially saw some success. The Japanese forces made progress towards Seoul, but the harsh winter of 1587-88 hampered their campaign. Konishi Yukinaga found himself defending his position at Busan and a series of coastal forts known as Waja. Meanwhile, Admiral Yi Sun-sin won a crucial naval battle at Myeongnyang, further complicating Japanese supply lines and movements. In addition to these setbacks, the Japanese occupiers faced relentless harassment from local peasants and guerrilla fighters, known as the Yubyong or righteous armies, which even included monks. The dream of controlling Korea, let alone advancing into Ming China, began to fade. Then, in September 1598, fate intervened. News of Hideyoshi's death reached the Japanese forces. An armistice was arranged between the 3 powers, and the invasion was called off. Despite the ceasefire, many Japanese troops had to fight their way to the coast before they could be evacuated back to Japan. In the chaos of the Japanese withdrawal, Admiral Yi Sun-sin was struck by a lucky bullet and killed, an unjust end for the man who had been most responsible for saving Korea. His diary of the war, Nanjung Ilgi, Daily Writings During the Troubles, was published posthumously, leaving a lasting record of his extraordinary efforts. And the wars had devastating consequences for Korea. The most immediate and tragic impact was the death of at least 125,000 Koreans. The Japanese samurai often cut off the noses and ears of their victims, sending these gruesome trophies back to Japan as proof of their kills. Additionally, 60,000 to 70,000 Koreans were taken as prisoners of war and brought to Japan. Korea's agriculture was severely damaged due to the Japanese scorched earth policy. It would take 2 centuries for production levels to recover. The cities were also hit hard, with widespread death, starvation, and disease. Seoul, in particular, saw its population drop from around 100,000 to 40,000. Many important cultural sites, such as Volguksa Temple near Gyeongju, were destroyed or looted. Even after the invasions, a small Japanese settlement with a contingent of samurai was maintained near Busan. China also faced significant repercussions. The Ming dynasty was already in decline under Emperor Wanli, especially after he withdrew from court affairs in 1582 following the death of his Grand Secretary Zhang Zhuzheng. The court eunuchs filled the power vacuum, but the wars with the Mongols and the Japanese strained the Chinese economy. Within 50 years, the Ming dynasty would be overthrown by rebels and then by the Manchus, who founded the Qing dynasty in 1644. Japan saw a shift in its ambitions following the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi on September 18, 1598. His successor, Tokugawa Ieyasu, abandoned the idea of creating an East Asian empire. By 1607, diplomatic and trade relations with Korea were restored and would continue for the next 2 centuries, though the wounds of the Imjin Wars would never fully heal. Interestingly, the Imjin Wars are sometimes called the Pottery Wars. During the conflict, many Korean pottery artists, known for their exquisite white porcelain, were forcibly relocated to Japan. These artists significantly influenced Japanese ceramics, particularly Satsuma ware, leading to a boom in Japanese pottery from the 17th century onwards. Captured scholars like Kang Hang also brought new ideas to Japan, including Neo-Confucianism, which had a lasting impact on Japanese culture.